So this is what we want to discuss, the essence of the joy of sport, intrinsic motivation. And over the 3 seminars, we want to get a better understanding of our own motivations and other people's. Then we want to develop new or renew some motivations. And then we want to become better managers of all the types of motivations we encounter in life. And then hopefully mentor and help our athletes do the same thing. And hopefully in a whole biblical approach. One of the phrases we like to surround all the time is this desire to integrate faith and sport. So we want to integrate our walk with God and our love with Jesus right into a playful and even competitive atmosphere, even at the highest level. So motivation is a big part of that. That's our goal for the next few sessions. So if you're at the summit, I threw up this little graphic that kind of summarizes them all. And if you're not there, it might be a little confusing, but this is just an overview of the kinds of motivations, and we'll break them down over the next 3 webinars. But this one, if you can see my cool little red laser thing on your screen, this is what we'll talk about today, intrinsic motivation. We want to try and make it a base or a grounding motivation. Then next week, we'll go to this kind of red and orange area, the kinds of motivation that, I use the word dangerous, but I don't quite like that word, kinds of motivations that can take us sideways or kind of get us mixed up sometimes, but very common in sport. One is reward and punishment, and the other is kind of a shame-based motivation where you're shamed and then you have to rescue your self-esteem through your performance. So that'll be next time. And then there's some extrinsic motivations that are quite healthy and really help us grow and mature as we understand them. And one is called an identified one, where we identify the things in our lives that we need to get better at, but we're not coerced, we're not shamed, we're not bribed, we just make a decision. That's pretty healthy. And then the next one is kind of what's called internal, where we want to get to the point where motivations are part of who we want to be, who we want to become. And as Mike Sharon was helping me as we were talking about this, what our calling from God is. And so that's kind of a mature form of motivation. It's extrinsic, but it's very mature. So yeah, that's where we're headed. And then we're going to have the world premiere of a new graphic that I'm asking Andrew Cron to work on, and he's still working on it, but we'll see it at the end, because I want to picture this in a bit of a different way. Something that will help us all, I think, if we can have a visible picture of all the kinds of motivations. So let's just start with some definitions. And again, you who are participating, feel free to unmute and throw out a question or a comment or something, and then I'll open it up sometimes. And yeah, I really do want to make this interactive and don't feel I have expertise handle on all these things. I want your questions and responses and stuff. So kind of the fancy termination or definition of motivation is a hypothetical construct that's used to describe internal or external forces that lead to initiation, direction, intensity, and persistence of behavior. I'm not sure if I understand that entire sentence, but what I get out of it is motivation helps us initiate. Motivation contributes to intensity. And motivation keeps us persistent at something. And so that's why we want to study it for our own lives, in ministry and relationships. And these are important things in sport. And can we become better athletes, or can we help athletes become better as they understand it? So the guys who are behind this theory, Edward Dici and Richard Ryan, been launching thousands of studies on this for quite a few years now. They kind of just make it simple. Why we do what we do is their definition of motivation. Or it can be defined as something that's the means that moves us to do something. But I was just reading a little bit further after the summit, And as I was reading one of their articles, I was kind of struck by this one sentence that they threw into one of their articles. Really, it was kind of stopped me in my tracks. It says, perhaps more important, in the real world, motivation is highly valued because of its consequences. Motivation produces. I thought, wow, that's elite sport right there, isn't it? And that really struck me. Why is this why coaches are so keen to motivate their players? Because then they'll produce. Or why managers want to motivate their employees? Because they'll produce. And sometimes we talk like this in ministry. We kind of need to produce. Maybe spiritual multipliers. Is this the end goal of our ministry? And that picture isn't all bad. The point of sport, or one of the points of sport, is to win. One of the points of business is to be profitable. And one of my favorite pictures that God uses over and over again in the scriptures is fruit. Or the grocer's term for fruit is produce, actually. It's production. And God loves to produce fruit. It's just a picture, and I love it. It's one of my favorite pictures, because if you know me, wherever I go in the world, I gotta get fresh fruit that's grown there, and go to the market. And so a good fruit tree produces way more than the owner of the tree can handle. He's got to give it away, A vine produces way more grapes than you need. This is a picture of God's goal for our life, is that we be fruitful. And so motivation must play a part in that. If we somehow, engage Him and His kingdom, we become fruitful. So motivations help us produce, which is a good goal. But we're broken. Our brokenness touches every area of our lives, unfortunately. So our brokenness really affects motivation, I think. And it leads us to hurtful places. And we all have those in sport and other areas of life, I think. And we hear these stories. And it leads us to mixed up behavior. And we see that in the world of sport constantly. And this is what we're trying to address. We're trying to help athletes deal with their own brokenness as we deal with our own brokenness. And hopefully God's producing fruit in us, but we see the effects of wanting to produce when brokenness touches us. So I just recently found this little graphic and quote from Billie Jean King, a great tennis player of a couple of decades ago. Champions keep playing until they get it right. So she wanted to be a champion, she wanted to produce, and something motivated her to do that, So I think we're on the right track here. Any comments? Feel free to jump in, and then I'm going to open it up in a couple of minutes here. So they use the phrase self-determination, which just means to act with a full sense of volition and choice. If you're self-determined, your will is involved, and choice is very important. I think we could use the word control. I'm more in control of my motivations than other people when I'm self-determined. And this is what we want to actually grow in. Should I be more in control of my motivations, or do I release them to others to motivate me? But when I do, that's when things can go sideways. So that's what self-determination is. The theory is says maintains the reasons for people's behavior, falls on this continuum of perceived locus of causality, which sounds kind of strange, but it just means you're trying to figure out where the motivation comes from. Where is it coming from? Ranging from self-determined, it's my choice, I'm in charge, to non-self-determined, someone else is in charge, or trying to affect it anyways. And so I got to adapt with that. This is what's basically the theory just says what happens all around us affects our motivations. And if you've come to National Training Camp, we repeat this over and over again in our labs, and then we explain it over and over again. Hey, when we mess with your circumstances, how come your motivations change? And we've all been through it. The angry coach or the bad referee or the reward or whatever we're doing. Whenever we change the circumstances, we see people change and we see a game change. So that's what this theory is all about, that things all around us affect our motivations. And so I'm fascinated or motivated, I guess, to explore this and then try and become, see how God speaks to this, how Scripture speaks to this, because I think it really helps us mature. So we want to help athletes be more in charge of their motivations by managing what's happening in their context. So, because tons of stuff happens in the world of sport that just affects the way players play their game and affects their motivation. So self-determined motivation, putting those two things together, is governed by the process of choice and experiences emanating from the self, those that are controlled. So the goal is to help athletes determine their own motivation, manage the ones they can control, and manage the ones that are coming at them from coaches, parents, federations, fans, the press, salary negotiations, or depending what level you're at. So today we're just going to talk about the intrinsic one. There's two basic kinds, extrinsic and intrinsic. Today's all about intrinsics. So a lot of this is review, but we did it quite quickly at the summit. So intrinsic is basically an activity that's just for the pleasure and satisfaction derived from the activity. That's why you engage in it. It's doing something because it's inherently interesting or enjoyable. You need no kind of inducement if you're intrinsically motivated. Is required or perceived. This locus of causality is all from you. It's all internal. There's no prods, there's no pressures, there's no rewards. You find it pleasant, and you have a strong sense of volition. So some of you heard me tell this story before when I get to go to Eastern Europe and teach the training camp principles to sport ministries there. And one year it was in Ukraine, in Kiev, or they spent a day in Kiev on the day of the World Cup final. And so they partnered with the church and they set up all these games and attractive things for the neighborhood to come and play and do stuff in a really dense neighborhood in Kiev. And then at night they were going to show the World Cup final on TV. So one of these things they set up was ball hockey, and which intrigued me. And so at one point there was a bunch of young boys playing the game, but this little girl came by. She was walking just through the area with, I guess this is her grandma, and she was just staring at this ball hockey game, but she was smaller than all the boys, and it was all boys, and she was pretty intimidated, so she wouldn't play. So one of the organizers, one of the guys involved with us, just took her and gently said, "Do you want to play?" And she was quite nervous and didn't want to play. So he just took her aside away from the game, and he put the hockey stick in her hand, and he dropped the ball at her feet. And I must have taken 30 pictures of her face, trying to capture the joy that was emanating from her face and body because a hockey stick was put in her hand. So, as Canadians, this is the deepest joy we perceive sometimes. And I got to see a little Ukrainian girl experience that for the first time. And then he stood and just said, "Pass the ball to me." And all they did was pass it back and forth. And her face never stopped beaming. It was amazing. And eventually another little boy came, and so then they kind of played together, and she was just glowing. This is intrinsic motivation. This is just the joy of playing, just for the joy of it. And then I noticed grandma, or in those countries, babushka, and her face was fascinating too. And I was trying to figure out what she was thinking, and I thought maybe she's thinking boy, I remember when I was a little girl and used to play different games. It's just so much fun to be a kid. Or maybe she's thinking, can I play too? Because there's just the joy of you never grow out of it, you know. So when people in all walks of life, when you read these studies who talk about intrinsic motivation, they often use a child's play as the best example. So when I've been hanging around lately or reading these theologians and philosophers who want to figure out sport philosophically or biblically, and they really think deeply about playing sport and write on it, they use this term that I'd never heard before, but now I'm understanding it. It's called autotelic. Autotelic. And autotelic means an activity or a creative work that's only purpose is itself. It has no other purpose in life but itself. And if something is autotelic, itself is its only purpose. And so often the greatest example, and people are trying to say what an autotelic activity is just a child who's playing. It doesn't have any other purpose for those who are playing except the joy and the play itself. And so this is a good picture too of intrinsic motivation. And a fully intrinsic motivated player needs no other reinforcement to play. You just engage freely. You're just sustained by the experience of it, the interest or the enjoyment that it gives. And then they compare people who are motivated this way by people who are externally motivated, which we'll get into later. And they're just discovering that people who are motivated this way have more interest, more excitement, more confident, which manifests itself usually in better performance, more persistent, more creativity, heightened vitality, self-esteem, general well-being. There's just all these great words, you know. So personally for me, the annual Knuckles football game, I'll play that game until they stop inviting me, you guys stop inviting me, or I just can't anymore. And I'm just content to count the steamboats because there's just something about playing with my friends and playing ground football that I'll just never, ever get tired of. It's just intrinsic. So I'm going to pull you guys in. We'll just get one more quote here. Oops. So the brilliant man who was the CEO for the Vancouver Winter Olympics wrote a book, but he started it just by sharing his own play experiences. I think he grew up in Ireland, and he was hooked by the first time he started playing games. And he says, by my early teens, I was obsessed with athletics. The field of play, whatever the game, was the place I always had the most fun. I enjoyed everything about sport, the teamwork, the intensity, the game, the way the games were built around a code of honor. And so loved it so much he stayed in sport all his life, and then got to actually organize an Olympics, you know, because that I think that intrinsic joy helped motivate him. So I'd like to open it up. Would one of you volunteer to unmute and share a personal example of a time where you were personally loving a game just for its own sake? You could share a childhood memory or a recent experience in a league you're playing in now, or maybe someone who's played at the highest level. Does someone want to just share this, describe your own joy of play or sport? How would you put it in your own words? If I triggered a memory in just telling the story or just describing it, then go ahead and share it.
I have one.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if I ever experienced this while I was playing football. I getting an echo here? And I think I was so externally motivated while I was playing. A really great one for me was when I'd interned at NTC after my football days were over, and we had a day that we went down to Parliament Hill. It was pouring rain, and all the participants showed up, and we just had like a touch football game on the hill, and we're getting soaked, and it was really warm out, and it was just. I remember I felt like my joy of sport came back at that moment. And it was like one of those times, like you said, where I just could have been there all day. I was having so much fun. And everyone was horrible at football. We weren't really getting anywhere. The game wasn't progressing really that well, but it was just such a great place to be at the time.
Huh. And you said you hadn't experienced that in a while in sport or in play, but you came back to it?
Yeah, I think when I was playing football, there was so much wrapped up in trying to impress my coach, impress my teammates, the pressure of doing well. And so it was just this great moment of being really free just to enjoy the sport again.
Fabulous. So one of our goals is taking that back to the culture where somehow you lost it. So a question for anyone, feel free to unmute. Which leads to that. Thanks, Kevin. Perfect example. Do you think athletes that you are working with now, whatever level you're at, still play intrinsically? Or how much of it do they, or how often do they still get to experience that? So throw that open to any and all of you. The athletes that you're working with now, do you think there's still some intrinsic motivation left?
Yeah, I think this is.
Go ahead,
Rocks. Girls first. Ladies first.
She muted, so go ahead, Steve, and then Rox will mute and go next.
All right. Age before beauty, then. I think, yeah, I think they do. I think it's always a mixture, right? I think somehow you do enjoy it, and then there are times when you kind of get flow back and forth sometimes between, okay, no, we gotta win because I gotta get a paycheck, and I gotta stay on this team, and then there's other times where, yeah, this is really fun. I enjoy it out here, because you just enjoy doing something that you love, and so I think it's kind of like life. It's staying focused the whole time to maybe have it being totally intrinsic, and I think that's the challenge. I would say, because I find that myself. I'm kind of the same as you, right? It's kind of like, so you're playing with kids that are younger, and you're kind of going, you know what? I can't chase you around, so I'm just going to do what I can do, and I enjoy what I do. I can't do that. Okay, that's cool. Do and enjoy it.
But still, you're still a big kid out there, eh?
I think, Dave, to go with what you're talking about, we've been in a lot of conversations with the pros and coaches, professional coaches, where they've talked about politics has taken the joy out of the sport. And I think that's an extrinsic, the politics. I've got to win or I'm out of here. And I've got a wife and 3 kids depending on me. So it's taking their joy away from the game. Not totally. They're still big kids. They're out there having fun. But it really, the politics, the finances, the judgment, that type of thing, the press can take the joy out of their sport.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are realities. So we're going to look at that next time to see how we can manage it. Yeah, and I've heard pros say, I'd play this game for nothing.
Yes.
And that's how they're stating, yeah, I get paid for this, but I love it, Yeah. Rox, are you going to say something?
Mm-hmm.
Say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to agree with Steve. I've seen both, and I've seen athletes go back and forth and wrestle with it. I just remember specifically on tour when we took a basketball team to Germany a couple years ago, and there was a woman on tour who I had journeyed with through her career, and had realized, I think before we left for Germany, but that I had rarely seen her smile when she played.
It was just rarely, it was just, she would talk about loving the sport, but I would never be able to see it. And I remember specifically one game we had in Germany, and she was glowing the whole game. And then for as much as she played, and then she got injured partway through. But I just remember the distinct change. And I remember that's like seeing it and calling it out and being like, that's what you can experience when you play at a high intensity. Just the joy just emanated from her. So I think it's the journey to recapture that is a tough one, but I think a very real one.
Okay, a couple other questions. Can it be a ministry in their lives to help them return to that? Can this be part of our mentoring and discipling and helping people grow spiritually? And secondly, you can answer that question or this one. Would returning to our intrinsic motivations or growing in it hurt or damage the priority of winning in elite sport communities? Because the priority of winning is a priority. They're not going to let that go, and we have to exist inside that. And it's winning that we've already mentioned that. Winning is one of the points of the game. So if we help athletes develop this, go back to it, manage it, grow in it, cling to it, is it gonna damage that priority? Is it going to distract them from that priority? Thoughts?
Hey Gage, Ryan here. I was thinking that, well, I think some coaches think that's going to happen, but I was thinking like anything, I think when you're trying something new, like, you know, it is a distraction because you have to be a little bit intentional about it. And so like maybe like a skill or any skill in sport, there's going to be some of that, maybe like a dip in performance because they're maybe not, you know, and they're in flow, whatever that means for them in their zone. So I would think like, just like anything, if they're really intentionally focusing on it, yeah, there could be a dip in performance and therefore a dip in winning. And that's what I think, though, arenas like NTC or tours are great places to happen because we have different expectations of what performance is for them. So that's the whole purpose of those trips and programs. So I think that's why it's really important to have those.
Yeah. Good thought. So it could be a distraction at first, like any new skill, fruit into better performance.
Yeah, and like any new skill, even though we believe or think or know that it's going to help them in the end, you know, it's hard for the athletes sometimes and coaches to sometimes believe that. So then they just go back to old habits because they're not playing as well or they're not performing as well.
Where you think of the woman Rox she had lost all joy. Did she think she had to be like that in order to prove that she was or playing at the highest level, or was that driven her out? You know, was she coached in that? Was it driven out of her? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I had a thought, DJ, and something that I've been wondering about is that if as we try to bring God into a sport, does that become an external motivator? And I guess like if the intrinsic value is the joy of the sport itself, and I feel like I wonder if there's times that we don't know exactly how God fits into that, and so then it almost becomes like, you know, us asking this question, you know, how does that integration happen? And is it enough just to be joyful in the sport itself? Does there need to be like an even greater motivation over that, you know, that like somehow my sport leads to pleasing God or trusting God more, or, you know, using those abilities, like, and then does that go back to external again?
Those are fantastic points. And we have to, you know, these phrases that we use, or you even hear it at camp when they're encouraging each other, who are you doing this for? Or I'm doing this for you. are you doing it as a act of pleasure for God, or a gift to Him, or to try and impress Him? You know, or even the phrase "audience of one." Now He's my audience, but am I do it for a reward for Him, or for So that's a that's a part of it.
Like, do we just replace God with our coach, right? Where, okay, instead of playing, for my coach's pleasure, now I'm playing for God's pleasure. And so I got to kind of earn God's love by being a great athlete too, or even just put, like, we know that maybe the winning, losing, but even just with the effort, right? Like, if I'm putting forth my best effort, then that's going to make God happier. And so I better do that. And then He's going to like me more, right?
Yeah. At every turn, our brokenness shows up. So then we have to rethink it, Thanks for bringing that up. Okay. Just an application point, then, as a player, if you're still a competitive athlete, as a mentor, if you're working with athletes, as a coach, which is a whole different area of study on this, actually, we need to learn what fosters and promotes intrinsic motivation, and also need to learn what undermines it. So when we can recognize what undermines it, then how do I get it back? So these are some application points for us. So one of the researchers from Montreal, actually at University of Montreal, Robert Vallerand, he's helped us with this a little bit, understanding intrinsic a little better. That really applies well to sport. He's divided intrinsic into kind of 3 types, which I think apply to sport pretty well. So I'll just pop that up on your screen. Hopefully it's there, yeah. And so, I like this. One is intrinsic motivation to experience stimulation. So that would be engaging in sport to experience the pleasant sensations derived from it. So, that's the easy one. Well, it's just something about, it's a blast. So Steve and I are going to run around on football day just because it's just something great about it. It's the physical experience of it, the sensory pleasures of it, the fun and excitement, the breathing hard, whatever. We just really, really like. There's something about it. But there's more to sport too. There can be another one, the motivation to accomplish. So that's engaging in a sport for the pleasure derived from trying to surpass oneself or improve skills. So that's just this innate drive in us that's sometimes not pure, but many, I think initially it is just to get better. So, the picture of the kid throwing free throws at on the driveway until the sun goes down, just over and over and over again. They just want to get better, and much of that's intrinsic, because there's just a joy in improvement and getting better. And then a third one is the intrinsic motivation to know, which is engaging in sport for the pleasure and satisfaction experience where one is learning and exploring something new. So this involves exploration, curiosity, learning goals. This somehow need as humans that we just want to explore. We want to know more. We want to get something new. This is maybe it motivated me. I'm kind of an information junkie, so I just like to know more about stuff. And this topic is one of them. The one who's known as the student of the game, the strategist that and often coaches, that's where they go next. Just let's break down this game and really figure it out. Is a joy for them. So can these 3 things kind of be foundations for joy for us, or for motivation? So let's move on to some application to sport then. So so far I'm using the word foundation. If we can come up with a better word, I sure like it. But intrinsic, I kind of see it, intrinsic then is my foundational motivation, the one I always want to hang on to, or the one I never want to let go, because it's the most valuable, it's the most interesting, it's the most pleasurable. It keeps me going. So no matter what the circumstances is, how can I keep this one really, really important? But before we go to helping athletes or rescuing athletes in this area, let's personalize it a little bit. And let's do it in our own walk with God and spiritual growth, because that's just a good exercise for us all the time. So in my own walk with God, or spiritual growth, or even the spiritual disciplines, am I motivated out of joy, interest, fascination, desire to grow, or obligation, fear, shame, or duty? And even throwing that question out, I don't want to trigger shame to motivate you. Sometimes that's kind of how it feels. Someone throws that question out, well, you're shaming me into having my quiet time. No, it's just a question to ponder, spiritually, how am I doing in this area? Is it intrinsic or do I turn it all upside down? It becomes law or duty or obligation or something. So I was even, I want to get better at this. I didn't know kind of where to turn. I had some verses in mind too that I've shared this summit. But I even Googled, I think, intrinsic motivation in the Bible or something. And people's blogs popped up, and gave me some ideas and verses and stuff. Feel free to unmute and share and point here too. So pretty cool verse here. Whom have I in heaven but you? And on earth nothing I desire besides you. So that's a pretty intrinsic motivation to just hang with God, because he's the best, or he's just so great, or I don't think I'm talking out a great experience here. I don't go there motivated in those reasons all the time, but that could be the essence of our relationship. How can I develop this intrinsic pleasure of God, just God himself? And then some other verses kind of fascinate me. In Psalm 19, the fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances, or some translations call it judgments, of the Lord are sure and altogether righteous. They're more precious than gold, much pure gold. They're sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. But if you go back a couple of verses that are actually on that little graphic of the woman in the sunset there, he's talking about the law. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. And then he goes to the fear and the ordinances. And whenever I read that, I went, the law is like honey to you? Because the writer wouldn't have had Jesus yet. He wouldn't have had a lot of the scripture. They just got, if it was David, up to that point, he's just got the law. And the law itself, he thought, was sweeter than honey in the honeycomb. And I'm going, I just don't see like God's, I guess I just see it as duty or taking the fun out of my life or trying to ruin my life or anti-rules or something, But yet, even his ordinances could or should be sweet to us. So I'm just kind of pondering and thinking out loud here. Not saying I've arrived in all these areas, but if you got a comment, you're free to throw something out there. Let's apply it to my ministry or job description. Am I motivated out of joy, interest, fascination, following what I think is my calling from God? Or does it just get down some days to obligation, fear, shame, duty? pleasing people, or my supervisors or directors or whoever. And yeah, it'd be nice if what I wanted to do, or what got me out of bed every morning to go to work, was a kind of an intrinsic joy of really loving what I do. And if it's getting a burden, then you know, I need to say, well, how do I return to this? What's gone wrong? I talked to Rod Alm on the phone a little while ago. He's celebrating his 80th semester in student ministry. 40 years, 2 semesters a year, and he's got to love it to hang in there that long, doesn't he? Like, and he does. You know, when he tells stories, you can see it on his face. He lights up like a little kid too. So this verse, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. This is from Jesus. But this verse got stained for me. Years ago, I was met a young Christian, but he got involved in a cult that also used the scriptures, and so they were teaching him one thing. He was trying to figure out back and forth. You know how you're arguing about verses and stuff like this, and so he said, "Well, will you meet with me and the leaders? You know, of this group I'm going to." I go, "No, I really don't want to meet with the leaders. You can meet with your leaders, and I'll meet with you, and we'll share, and then you can decide." Blah, blah, blah. So then the kid said to me, "Well, last time you said you loved me. If you really loved me, you'd meet with the leaders." And so then I'm just, "Oh, you little weasel, you're manipulating me now." So I ended up meeting with the leaders because he, threw that one at me. So sometimes I read this verse like that. Jesus, well, if you love me, you do keep my commandments. But, oh, you're trying to manipulate me into, like, shame me into this, It's not how my brokenness works with God and other people. But I don't think it's that way, He's not a manipulator. He's not a shamer. So if I was in love with Jesus, there should be intrinsic motivations just to obey him and do what he wants and be involved in his kingdom work. And so we personally need to return to these intrinsics. So I'll just throw this out. We use this in our, we'll teach us some of these verses actually at camp this year, I think. And I was just reading, this may be more of an assignment. I'll just give this to you. Philippians 3:10-14. I think all sorts of motivations are in this verse, because he's talking about his past and what drives him and his future and stuff like that. Pretty fascinating stuff, this passage. But look at verse 10. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of sharing. Is this the intrinsic motivation to know? Like in Valorant, it was knowing facts, but this is knowing Jesus himself. So that seems like a kind of a knowledge of him. I want to get to know Jesus. But in verse 12, he says, I haven't obtained this. I haven't become perfect, but I press on to take that for which Christ took hold of me. He wants to become the person Jesus thought he could become, Not the person he was when Jesus took hold of him. He was a Christian killer, but the person. So that's actually the last motivation we'll look at in a couple of weeks. It's kind of like this, integrating it with who God thinks I am. But then 14 reward oriented. I press on towards the goal to win the prize, what God has called me to. And that's very athletic language in his culture, actually. He's referring to the ancient games there and winning the, athlete in the ancient games that's going to win a wreath. So that's kind of, so I'll just throw that out for you to think about and maybe spend some time, and then as we gain in motivations. Rachel, did you unmute there?
Yeah, well, I was just saying, I think it's really interesting how it can be easy to look at intrinsic motivation, say that's the only motivation we ever want or need to use. But to look at, even in here, as you comment on this prize at the end, right, that extrinsic motivation isn't necessarily bad. I think it's in some ways neutral, but a constant pattern of extrinsic motivation is your main motivation, or fear is your main driver, will have long-term negative consequences, but not to classify good and bad. I think we like to value everything. really cleanly, and I think it's cool how they fit together maybe a little bit more. I don't know, we want to stay shifted onto the intrinsic end, but there's a place for these different types in our experience.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up now, because and that's in the literature too, and sometimes it's like a good versus evil. Good is the intrinsic, bad is the extrinsic, and that's not the point. Yeah, so thanks for reminding us that right away. And some of the extrinsic can be dangerous because our sin nature wrecks them, and we'll talk about that in next time. But they don't have to be, or at least the reward doesn't have to be, and even some forms of discipline don't have to be. So yeah, thanks. That really brings us back to some good wisdom there, Rachel.
Yeah, I think, Dave, my experience, maybe my personality is very similar to what Rachel's saying. I'm one of those personalities, I need the extrinsic to get to the intrinsic. For instance, I love studying God's word. I love teaching, but I need a deadline. Extrinsic for me would be, I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to be a boring teacher. I don't want the kids yawning while I'm teaching, people falling asleep. That's my extrinsic. So that's why I get in there, I study, I get illustrations. But when I'm in there studying, getting illustrations, I love it. And it's where my joy comes from. It's how God's blessed me. But I need that extrinsic to stop doing dishes, stop talking to people, stop doing things to get in there and do my work. I need, okay, there's a deadline. I'm going to be shamed if I don't do this right. Get to work. And then, so it's like a frame around the picture. The picture is the intrinsic, but the extrinsic is kind of the frame to it's kind of the whip, with the horse, you boop, and then he gets going and he has fun.
Yeah. And we'll talk about how you can change that from shaming or reward to a decision that you've endorsed that gets you the reward. So that's the last two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If excellence is a goal of mine or a priority of mine, and them not falling asleep is a priority of mine, it's no longer a shaming thing. It's a conscious decision you've made. You're not, that's who you want to be.
Right.
Like it's a self-determined extrinsic. It's a healthy choice.
Right.
So we'll get there too. Yeah. So let's not just say it's today is all the good stuff.
Yeah, I was also thinking when we talk about and we expose different types of extrinsic motivations or motivations that athletes can't control, like at MTC, I think we have to be really careful with the language that we use, because I think it can come across as like, oh, these are exposed. Like, why do you, I remember thinking that as an athlete, like, oh, well, why when we change the situation do you change? Like, we're controlling you. I think we need to be just really careful about the language that we use, and even because I think there's already that tendency for people to think, oh, extrinsic's bad, intrinsic's good. And so to actually allow people to really sit with things like that, I think we need to really think about how we, the tone and the way that we think about it and the way we question people when we do labs at NTC.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Yeah, because we want to create we want a healthy perspective of this rather than this is good and this is bad, Good points.
And I think because sometimes we think that intrinsic is equals relationship with Jesus in a good place, where we're talking about something a little bit different too, right? Because I think what I hear you saying, DJ, is that even in your relationship with God, there's extrinsic and intrinsic motivation that can play into that, right? So they're not exactly the same thing, but we try to figure out where those meet exactly.
There seems to be. He talks about reward. He talks about discipline. So it's not like we're avoiding this or condemning it.
Yeah, so I think sometimes, I remember reading a book that talked about like the rewards of heaven and how sometimes we've been so worried about that, letting that motivate us, that we don't actually keep our eyes on the prize, right? And that there's some value in keeping our eyes, on the perfecter of our faith and going after it that way. So yeah, it's helpful to do that.
Yeah.
And isn't wanting to glorify God through our sport an extrinsic motivation?
Yeah, if the trigger is any trigger that's outside of you is extrinsic. Okay, then what happens is you internalize that, but you can either internalize it in a shame way or internalize it in a healthy way. The healthy way is, I need to do this. This is good for me. This will produce whatever the goal I want, or this will become who I want to be. The shame way internalized would be, well, I would feel awful I didn't, or he'll be mad at me if I don't, or yeah. So anything that's stimulating motivation that's outside of you is extrinsic, but there are self-determined ways to deal with it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, let's move on to some applications in terms of mentoring then. So Clark Glover is working on a really cool training manual for his church sport ministry, and he's doing some biblical basis of it. That's and historical stuff that's pretty fascinating. He's let me see some of it, and he directs people toward this cool verse in Psalm 19, which I've heard before, but I never really thought about it until he put it in this thing. I started looking at it again. So verse 4 goes, and 5, their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. In the heavens he has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion. And then this little phrase, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. So if you go back a couple of verses, it's about the glory of the heavens declaring the glory of God and who God is, and then the psalmist gives examples. So his example is like the sun's glory is like this: from when it rises, goes across, and when it sets. It's like a bridegroom coming from its pavilion, but its glory is also like a champion rejoicing to run his course. Or Young's translation is, he rejoices as a mighty one to run his path. And the King James is, he rejoices as a strong man to run a race. So it might be a picture of an athlete wanting to compete or going for it. And if it is, it doesn't endorse sport, but what it does do is God, I think, in this verse, is acknowledging that we love it when we go out to play, because he's using it as an example. It's as glorious as the rising and setting sun. This excitement we get when, you see that even in our meetings, we're meeting, and then it's time for the game, whatever it's going to be. Or even, our fun time when we just start playing around, people just rise up and get excited. And so is God actually acknowledging that as something that's real in this verse? Let me just tucked in this little song. So, does intrinsic motivation then fit God's design for us? So if we return to those three helpful ones that Valoran talked about, stimulation, accomplishing something, and knowing something, can we start applying that to the book of Genesis and creation and things like that? Genesis 1:27, God's created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female has created them. So we've been created in God's image. We're like God. We behave like God. We think like God. There's just all sorts of us. Every part of us somehow is this image of God. So if he's designed me as an emotional person, because he has emotions, I have emotions, then could I play to experience the joys and hardships of sport this is intrinsic because this is the way he made me. Am I acknowledging these joys because he's made me that way? These bring out great emotions, and he's made me an emotional person. So yeah, this is part of who I am. This is how he created me. Or the second one, if God's designed me in such a way that if I practice something, I improve, that's just so amazing. Why do we get better when we repeat something? I'm sure glad it happens, but when you dribble a basketball or shoot or set a volleyball or even run and then run again, you get faster or you get better. That's an amazing piece of creation. That's a really cool idea he had. I can actually get better at something the more I repeat it. And I'm fascinated by the skateboarders. That first little trick where they jump and the board flips and they land on it. Have you ever seen a kid practice that? They do that for hours, just standing there, hour after hour after hour till they nail it. And that's their simplest trick. Their tricks are so hard. There's just something about wanting to get better at something, the joy of it. I think we're made that way. Well, we're made to improve because it works. Thirdly, has God designed me with a mind that is thirsty for growth and knowledge? So he's got a mind. It doesn't grow because he knows everything, but mine does. As I learn stuff, my mind grows. I think better. I know more stuff. Could I play for that stimulation? Because that's the way I'm made. I think these three are pretty easy to apply to the creation story. This is who I am. Can we help athletes return to that? Tell me what you love about the game. So if you love the mental part of the game, then pay attention in film because you love it. You love studying your playbook. Like, this is one of the reasons that makes you great, because you're very strategic. Like, embrace the parts you really love, or the repetition, or the emotions of it. Go back to that and just tell yourself, I really do love this. Okay. And that's a simple step then to go to playing with a posture of gratitude. Thank you, God. I just really enjoy this. Thank you that I've improved so much. Thank you that I know so much about the game now. The psalmist said, you make me glad by your deeds, O Lord. I sing for joy at the works of your hands. I'm just grateful to play. And so that's another one for me, I think for Steve too, at the annual football game. I'm just thankful to be out there. It is a blast.
Amen.
Yeah. And then this is kind of a goal for us. Playing as an act of worship. Sometimes I don't know how to explain it. I'm not sure if I know how to do it, but is it a goal that if we were doing this, it would be extrinsic in a way, because it's to him, but intrinsic, or at least self-determined, because I'm in charge and that's why I'm playing. I've decided to play this way. It brings me joy. Yeah. So how can we help promote and help the athlete promote their own intrinsic motivation? How can we help them develop this as a base, so we're not as a reminder by Rachel, it's not going to be either or. It's not going to be good versus bad, but this seems to be the one that keeps us going longer, faster, harder, with more enjoyment. So I'm calling it base. I don't know if that's the best word. So Mia Hamm, the great soccer player, has got a great quote: "Somewhere behind the athlete you become and the hours of practices and the coaches who have pushed you is a little girl who fell in love with the game and never looked back. Play for her." So you could do our application, play for yourself, play for that little girl, but at least go back to the little boy or little girl in you that just loves the game, and never let that go, you know. And this is how you're made. I think this is a part of God's good created order. So I've asked Andrew Cron to help us with instead of using that line one, and Mike's been helping. And so Mike kind of had a picture like bubbles or something that were inside of us, and you could maybe manage or grow the different bubbles. So if Intrinsic will keep green, and this is Andrew's first attempt. He's going to keep working on this for us, but all these different motivations do get internalized and get inside of us, and so we want to manage them. But if we see them as pictures of like bubbles inside us, should some be bigger than others? Should Intrinsic stay pretty big? And then the last bottom two, the identified and integrated ones, are very healthy. Should they stay pretty big? External one needs to be managed. And I'm hoping the interjected, the shame and blame one will shrink over time or something. So we're working on this. If you have another ideas on how we could give ourselves and athletes a kind of a cool picture of how we'd apply all of them to our lives, and then and apply what Rachel's saying to us. Yeah, it's not black or white, good or bad. It's understanding all of them. And so if we were all intrinsic, we'd look like this, totally green. And the other ones would be pretty small, but some of the other ones are pretty mature, and some of the other ones won't go away in the world of sport. So our goal, we'll learn about the rest in the next seminars, and then our goals is people will see how we grow in the healthy ones, and then how we can mentor others. So that's kind of it for today. Can we any last thoughts, or can people kind of just give me your, especially on application, how we can teach and mentor, and are we on the right track here, helping athletes? Rachel?
Yeah, I think as we look in coaching and being transformational, one of the verses, I'm talking with Clark, because Clark sees the world in an amazing way. He brought the verse John 10:10, "The thief comes only to steal and destroy, but I've come that they may have life and they may have it to abundance." And I think when we think of this abundant life we desire for our athletes, that intrinsic motivation plays a huge piece in whether their life is abundant or whether we are stealing and destroying and breaking them down.